there's this concept of svara, and I thought it would be great to hear the Reb's thoughts on use of svara and halacha. And there were at least three categories that I was thinking of. One I'm a little less interested than others, just
Hmm.
because it's sort of implicitly discussed elsewhere. One is use as far in terms of interpreting a text like a Gemara or a Rishon or Achron. It's like implying our seichel, employing our
Hmm.
seichel to understand, what the author's actually, intention is or what the most likely interpretation is. The second one is, let's say, sometimes we see the halacha applied in a way that is using a lot of svara. So just, you know, I'm thinking of the sort of thing that we touched upon a little bit yesterday, but I am very curious about, was the idea that there's a Rav who, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, that we mentioned last time, that proposed that maybe the gzera of refuah on Shabbos should no longer apply because it's not relevant to modern context, which is, what we saw with Rav Moshe in terms of understanding of an oven, is that if the oven is filled with steam, that you end up with a certain halachot which don't come out of a simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but basically it's sort of employing a lot of svara in terms of, seems like, understanding the situation in a way which would conflict with, just a straight up reading of the text. And then the third place is, that I'm also curious, if we get to it or don't, which is the use of svara to understand how a certain halacha is going to affect the kihila or the individual, for better or worse, and when do we use sort of economic considerations for, a chumrah, let's say something like the kosher phones, where people had an intuition that this is not a good thing. It doesn't matter if it's in the Shulchan Aruch or not. Maybe we'll make it asur. And so I was just wondering if you could elaborate on when we're going to use svara versus going by svarim, or and the
Hmm.
like.
Okay. I'm not sure I understood the three different categories as you had them, but I'll start with the first one, which I think I understood, and then we'll see if I'm drawing, whether or not I'm making distinctions between the different categories or not. We'll go then. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with, I'm going to start with, let's say, using Svara. I'm going to go with Ramesh's approach in the Chuvas, which he applies many times, many times, where he analyzes a discussion of the Gemara. He points out questions about the Gemara, issues that bother him, or things, and then he shows, and therefore, right, the Gemara must mean this. And sometimes he'll do it with Iran, or Tosfos, or Shulchan Aruch, right? And he'll go from stage one, and then he'll say, and therefore, this must be what the pshat the sugya is, right? And therefore,
Mhm.
since must be what the pshat the sugya is because of these observations or questions he has, the halacha comes out that X, right? And I think that's
Mhm.
what you were talking about in the first instance, where he's simply
Yeah.
applying his own basic brilliance, but he's applying his own brilliant svaras to pulling apart a sugya such that when he's finished, he says, well, now we have certain halachic conclusions that I'm going to tell you about, that we're going to reach. So let me think of a few instances where he does this, just will be able, so it's not so abstract and it's more concrete. I don't remember the Sugyas HaGomara well, but I do remember that he has this tshuva, um, about, um, where he reaches the conclusion based on the Gemaras that if let's say, a stepfather and a stepdaughter or an adopted daughter, okay, that
Mhm.
the laws of yichud are completely different from than they would be on a regular situation. They're much more lenient,
Hmm.
right? And his rationale behind it is because of the way he analyzes the situation of the Gemara. The Gemara says that somebody might think that this is his actual daughter, or these are his sister, the sister, or the stepbrother, the stepsister is a actual sister, and therefore you have to put certain xeris into place. And why would people even think that when there are obvious things that you have to be concerned about, like yichud all the time? And that should itself tell people that there's no such concern,
Hmm.
right? And therefore, it must be that the rules of yichud are different. And therefore, he says these are the rules of yichud that apply in these situations. And since these are the rules of yichud that apply in these situations, and therefore there's no problem whatsoever with a stepfather and a stepdaughter being in the same house at the same time, because the mother of the stepdaughter, who is the wife of the stepfather, right,
Hmm.
knows about the fact, and she's going to keep her ear tuned to the whole situation, and that's a good enough reason that there's no yichud.
Okay.
And he says the yichud is a different form, and he creates a new form of yichud, and he paskins
Hmm.
that way, and therefore, and that's very useful. And I tell
Hmm.
people about this all the time, and I tell people that I showed them Rav Moshe Shuba, and I said, you have every right to rely on Rav Moshe, particularly
Hmm.
since the prohibition of yichud in these situations is almost for sure derabanan anyway. But um, and when you have a derabanan and you have a prominent posting telling you a svara why something's mutter, right? Until you've proved them wrong, you have a right to rely on it.
Hmm.
So I'll tell them, okay, fine, this is what we're poskening, okay, based on these shuvas, okay. Now I'm right now working through a different shuva of emotion with my chevron bachoras,
Hmm.
and it has to do with the situation about the shellac,
Hmm.
natural shellac, which is an interesting substance, and I didn't really understand what the substance was, and it's a secretion of certain insects which they use to
Okay.
protect their larvae. In other words,
Okay.
it's basically like they secrete their larvae on a branch, and then they secrete a substance onto the branch and the larva together, which protects the larvae from predators.
Okay.
Okay, so it's like a shell. I mean, it's not a shell
Okay.
physically, but it's a wax that coats them and protects them. Okay, so it's used
Hmm.
industrially, commercially, used for food,
Okay.
right? Is it a considered yotzi min atame or not? So Rav Moshe has a very interesting thing. I'm not going to go into the whole sugya, right?
Uh,
But in his analysis of the whole discussion, right, Rav Moshe basically understands how he's understanding the sugya. Okay,
mhm.
there's a machlokas tanoim over there. Then there's a machlokas achronim, how to understand one of the tanoim. There's first a machlokas rishonim, which tana we pass like, and then there's a machlokas achronim, how to understand that Tana, one of the Tanaim, and Rav Moshe takes it to its nth degree of analyzing each of the opinions, and he says, well, according to this opinion, for sure it's mutter, right? And but it's not exactly clear how he compares it to the cases of the Gemara, but he does. He says that, oh, this is like the case of the Gemara, that's mutter. And according to the other Tana, oh, the other opinion, well, it will be good anyway. And according to this opinion, it might not be good, but then I have other heterim. And
Wow.
he basically presents in the end of the tshuva, it's like there's an old joke that they say, the purpose of a Rav is to be Marvis Fakis, create a lot of questions. So Rav Moshe basically has 5 different reasons why this could be mutter. So,
Okay.
and if he went backwards in it, he would just have the 5th reason was fine. But he didn't. He wanted to go the other direction, so he shows you all the different reasons. So you have like 5 different reasons why it's mutter, and he says, well, some of them won't be true according to all opinions, but some of them will be true like all opinions. So therefore, he poskins that the stuff is mutter. Now, it's an interesting piece, and I'm going through the piece, and but it's all pure svara, right? Pure svara based on his analyzing a piece of Gemara with utilizing some of the Mefarshim for helping him out, but basically he's analyzing a piece of Gemara, right?
Right.
And some of the questions that he raises with some of the Achronim are questions that when you read the Gemara, I think anybody who knows how to learn Sugya is going to read the Gemara and raise those questions, and he's presenting you these answers, right? And then we finish the whole thing. He presents you with a psak halacha based on his analysis of how he put together the sugya. Chazon Ish does the same thing, not infrequently. Shlomo
Hmm.
Zalman Auerbach does the same thing, not infrequently. I think, of the group of them, I would say Reb Moshe and the Chazon Ish are certainly, they all three of them are very independent thinkers and working it through very independently.
Hmm.
And I'm just thinking of a interesting, different angle on it where Vosner turns apart a whole sugya differently from everybody else looks at it. And the shaila I'm thinking about here is whether when you say Mashiach Mered Goshim and Mered Atol or Saint Talamot Livracha in the southern hemisphere,
Hmm.
and his analysis is basically, well, to daven for something different from what your hemisphere would want or require, right, is basically asking God to change the teva. That's not going to be good for anybody. So, so
Oh, right.
therefore, the
Yeah.
rules are completely different, right? Which is an interesting way of looking at it. And I find it refreshing and logical, right?
Right.
It's definitely independent. So,
Right.
so that's a case where you're applying svara either to a new case in all these situations that we're talking about. It's really applying a new case and seeing how the Gemara's rules apply in our new case.
Hmm.
Although the bottom line is that you're starting out with here's what the Gemara says, and now what do I think this, how it applies over here?
Hmm.
Let's take a case you're very familiar with. The interesting shilos about how a Tzursa Pesach works,
Okay.
right? In other words, these opinions about where one side, the lechi, on one side of the Tzursa Pesach is inside an enclosed area, right? Or where the Tzursa Pesach goes over a wall,
Right.
right? And in other words, these are all situations in which basically Achronim of the last 200 years, right, said, well, we know what a classic Tzursa Pesach is, but we also know that you have a lot of unusual cases if you're trying to use existing structures, right? You're going to, and you're not in control of just putting a Tzursa Pesach any way you want to, right? So you have to create your own new types of Tzursa, or you could use it. Well, are these acceptable? It doesn't look like your perfect Tzursa Pesach. It is, one here and a thing over the top. But,
Hmm.
are the fact that we've done things differently from the way the Gemara describes, right? In how it's set up or where it is, or whether, does that invalidate it,
Hmm. Right.
right? And so these are all basically applying pure svara, right? As we understand the concepts, right? And then seeing where we end up with halacha. Now, everybody does that, right? In other words, every posek will do that in terms of new applications, right? The questions you had been asking me previously was more in terms of we know what the earlier poskim say, and now we're going to try to figure out which ones we're going to follow, right?
Hmm.
And that's a question of like hachra and sugya, like which approach we're going to say is the one we think is the right approach. In these instances, it's more like we've got new cases, new applications, and we're trying to figure out what the rules are for the Gemara and trying to take these rules and applying them to cases that we don't have in front of us from previous experience.
Right.
And now we're going to say, well, what are our rules? Right. And that's going to have to be pure
Right.
Svara. Svara with Raya. In other words, maybe you'll be able to find a Raya to something, but chances are that you won't find, maybe you will find a Raya. Sometimes you do find. But without finding a Raya, you're basically left in, let me understand logically, right? What rule applies over here, and whether the rule that we have answers our question or not. So I'm not sure if
Right.
I've answered what your question is, but basically every posik, there's not a posik in the world who won't apply svara in such a situation because you have no other choice. You're going to have to apply svara. What else are you going to
Right.
do? There's no precedent, right? You're going to have to say svara
Yeah.
and then try to figure out now, therefore what, right? And you're going to go from there.
Okay.
Okay. Okay,
And
so I don't know that did that answer you the first of your questions.
I think that addresses generally the first two.
Okay.
in terms of using svara to, I guess, apply a halacha. It's not that different from um, using svara to interpret a text.
Yeah.
And what
Just
about the
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah?
I was going to share. Let me just share with you a little in here. We talked about previously the machlokas, let's say, between the Bis Yosef and the Ramah and the Marashal about how to be machriya machlokas among earlier posts,
Mhm.
right? So,
Right.
so we talked about that a bit. The basically the Bis Yosef there is saying that in our generation, I don't see that anybody's going to be able to tell us which opinion of the Gemara is correct, right? We
Mhm.
don't do that. And on rare occasion, we will. But as a rule of thumb, we're not going to do that. We just feel that they were so much greater than us, right? We're not going to do that, right? When there's a case happens, he does do it, but that's rare. Instead, I'm going to look at, and he says, I'm going to look at the three biggest people that Klal Yisrael accepted as posku, right? And then he tells us his rules. 2 out of 3 is going to pascha like. If it's one against one, he's going, and the third one doesn't say anything. He's going to go l'chumra by deraisen, l'kula by derabbanans, and yeah, or he's going to look at the other poskim, and if he has one against one, he's going to follow and see if the other poskim tend to follow one over the other. He'll follow what they say, right? But it's based on an assumption that rather we he doesn't say we can't analyze the sugya and reach our own conclusions, but he says that on an ongoing basis with such a volume of halachic material, to say that we're able to go through every sugya of Shas and work it through correctly to its nth degree all by ourselves, right? He's saying that that's just an unreasonable demand for someone in our generation, and therefore I'm going to follow this other approach of looking at what the previous accepted poskim did, right? And the Marshal's tendency is to say, no, sweat it out, work it out, and figure out who's right and which approach is correct, right? And that's what you're doing. Now, you're telling me that there'll be situations where you can't do that. So instead of making it a rule, make it an exception. In
Mhm.
other words, you Tzvi Goldstein sent me, Yirmiyohu Kaganoff, a Shaila on a particular Shaila, and I haven't had a chance ever to be ma'ayin in that sugya thoroughly yet to the nth degree, but I am familiar with what the Shulchan Aruch says on it. I'll tell
Mhm.
you, well, here's what the Shulchan Aruch paskins, right? And I've never worked through the sugya as to whether I don't know, a woman whose father's not Jewish, right, is allowed to marry a Kohen. I know that if I'm not mistaken, the halacha says that she shouldn't marry a Kohen, but if she did, right, b'di'evid, we allow them to stay together. I'm pretty sure that that's what the halacha is over there. I have to go check it. Now, I've never gone through the Rishonim and see whether the Rishonim come to that conclusion. I've learned the Gemaras at one point, but I certainly haven't gone through it thoroughly enough to give it a decision. I'm just saying, well, I know the Shulchan Aruch reached this conclusion, and we follow the Shulchan Aruch as a rule of thumb. So I'm just quoting Shulchan
Mhm.
Aruch, right? Does that mean that I would never use my sword to paskin a shaila? It's not true. I use my sword to paskin shailas all the time, but
Mhm.
I want to be able to know that I've tried the sugi as best as I can before I do it. And if you're asking me a quick question, I don't have a chance to give a detailed work through the sugi to give you a detailed answer, right? I'll just tell you, well, I know Shulchan Aruch says this. Let's follow it. So we're using the Machaber's approach in some instances and the Marshal's approach in other instances. And what we're basically saying is that Marshal's, and this is my analysis, Marshall is saying is to say I'm always going to follow these poskim is a defeatist attitude,
Mhm.
right? Don't use it as your first line of defense. Use that as your temporary line of defense when you have no choice. Like somebody called the Marshal on the phone, right? And asked him a Shaila, and he's in the middle of some other sugya, or he's about ready to go to sleep, or, the person needs an answer right now. They'll tell him, well, I know the Torah Paschal's this. That's okay to do
Mhm.
for short term, right? But he shouldn't be relying on that when he's writing a sefer on halacha. He should work it through and give you this conclusion,
Uh-huh.
right? Now, the Ramah in this instance is actually, I'm wondering about it now, because the Ramah follows Minik HaPoskim. Okay, in other words,
Right.
we Bnei Ashkenaz have these following 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 svarim, right? that tell us what we're in the habit of doing. Sometimes l'chumra, sometimes l'kula, right?
Mm.
We poskin that right, that drawing a blank on oh Atichanas Novela, right? By Shari Surim,
Mm.
right? Even by we know by Shari Surim Atichanas Novela is a Xera de Rabbanan, and we answer it, maybe not always, but under certain circumstances, right? And it may be based on a Yerushalmi in Orla, I think it was, or whatever it might be based on, but that's not the point. The point is that this is our practice. We do this. We're master
Mm.
on the Shai, right? And you can't be Mekel because that's our practice among Ashkenazim, so we have to do that. But on the other hand, when you come to a sugya like, let's say, Bishal Akum, we rely on certain things that if you go into the sugya, they're not so pushing how they come out of the sugya,
Mm.
right? We say, well, that's okay. We rely on that. That's a good interpretation. Or we rely that yeah, it's okay if a lung has a small thing that attaches from one part of the lung to the other part of the lung, or from part of the lung to the chest wall in a way that it seems from the Gemara it would be a treifa. But we have an accepted custom that if we can remove it and there's no, without causing any damage to the lung, right, that we rule it kosher, right? And that's based on the Rush, who says that that's was the accepted practice among the Bnei Ashkenaz going back for hundreds of years, right? We know that the Rashba says if you do that, you're feeding trephis or Suffolk trephis to people, right?
Right.
So he's saying that's not an, I know where you guys got this at from. There's nothing in the Gemara that says about this, right? And the
Mm.
Rama is saying, well, but that's what we do, right? So so you do have definitely different approaches, but where you apply svara, right? It's hard to say that I'm going to use the svara to apply whether glot is mutter or aser, right?
Right.
It's like either we know the Gemara says something is aser. We say, well, either we're only meant such a situation. Why? Well, I can't prove that means svara. I can only say, well, that's our practice,
Right.
right? So
Well, I
that's
mean,
like
well, with
level.
Traphus, you do have a funny thing that there's two opposite extremes in the Hilchos Traphus. On one hand, you have Halacha Moshe Sinai, and on the
Mm-hmm,
other hand, we have this klal that it's not going to live 12 months,
mm-hmm,
which we can definitely apply a lot of svara to that.
mm-hmm.
And
Right.
then the two are sometimes gonna conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
does anybody actually apply that rule in modern trephos and in halacha? Do we ever see somebody saying, well, look, we know that this animal's actually going to live, or we know for sure this animal's not going to live?
I don't know. It ever
And
says anywhere that if something is definitely not going to live. And Treifei Lechaya, which is Machlokes
Mhm.
Tanoim and Orim, but I don't know that we say that Treifei Lechaya means that anything that's not going to live for 12 months is automatically a Treifa.
Okay, right.
First, it has
That
to
doesn't
be
have to
Treifa,
follow.
right? That's right. If it's not a Treifa, right, it's kosher.
Right.
It's got to meet the definition of whether the 8 or 18 or 70 categories of treifa, depending on how you define them, right? You've got to define, what it is that makes it into a treifa, okay?
Right.
But now within that definition, if you hold treifa einachaya,
Yeah.
that even though it has a tear or whatever other things we have that we're talking about are there, but we know that it can go on living for years with this,
Right.
right? So if you hold treifa Eina Chaya, that means by definition this is not a treifa,
Right.
right? Now, if you hold treifa Chaya, then it's got nothing to do with whether it's going to live or not.
Right. Right. Yes.
But since you are correct, we pass treifa Eina Chaya. Okay, that's the accepted psak in the among Tanoim and Amoraim. So we pass treifa Eina Chaya, and if treifa Eina Chaya, then in final say, right, bottom line is if it's going to live, that's not what was meant by the treifa that the Torah is telling us in the Halacha Moshe Sinai.
Right. Well, I wonder if then you have a confluence of the minhag that, I think, I imagine a lot of people would be reluctant to paskin that something's not a treifa, because of, modern, you know, uh, understanding of how the body works, if that's how the Rishonim and Achronim and the Minhag Yisrael is not like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So some say, well, it really depends. The way I would give the answer simply is it depended on whether Chazal's determination was whether this is going to live or not at their time. And if it changes subsequent to Chazal, but we're still following what was decided in the conclusion of the Gemara, as the Rambam says, because Klal Yisrael accepted the conclusions of the Gemara. So that acceptance, right, of the conclusion of the Gemara by Klal Yisrael is koveya the halacha on the same level as the decision of the Beis HaGadol when there was one.
Oh, I see.
In the meantime, we have, we're still following their decision. Now, I will tell you that a very choshev posik that I know, knew, yes, Paskin on Shilas, at least in one case of treif, I know he Paskin that if you create a treif in order to heal an animal from an injury, that's the way the doctors heal it, right? It can't be a treifa.
Okay.
Right. Now,
Right.
that's basically
because you're saying because the doctor's determination is that Rove, most of the time this is going to be fine.
Well, it's more than that, he says. He says that this is a problem. The problem itself, right, is going to kill the animal eventually.
Right.
And we do this X in order to heal the animal from this problem. Right. And the vets know that this is an accepted method that everybody that is standardly used to heal the problem. Right. Well, that can't be making it into a treifa.
Right.
Because, by definition, if it was killing it, they wouldn't do it. Right.
Well, yeah, that has a big nafkamina because isn't that like a standard procedure to if the cow is bloated?
Yeah.
So
this was the case. This
wait,
exactly was what the case was.
So question. So who was this Rav? And if you don't want to say the name, I'm just curious as to why.
Rabbi Yisrael Belsky said so in a written tshuva, right? Where I think it was, the case was with the thing they call displaced ebobasin, which is exactly you're describing. That it's usually because the cow is not eating grass, but it's eating feed. Okay, so a lot of gas accumulates in its abobasin, which is its biggest stomach, its first stomach, right? And it distends, which means it blows it into the wrong place in the thing, and it then gets caught and twisted, right? And the cow will not survive that unless you do something. And there are several ways of treating it, but one of the simplest ways of treating it is to I think they somehow get the air out of it and then they bolt it in place so it doesn't float around. Now, the way you bolt it in place is you got to put a hole through it to bolt it in place, right?
Right.
So they put a hole through it and bolt it in place, and that's how they make sure it doesn't blow around anymore. Okay. So the question is that, well, isn't that making it into a treifa by definition?
Yeah, that's interesting. Right.
Which is what most people hold, and then that became a whole big question was, well, if that's true, then how can you drink milk, not knowing whether the cow's milk might have been from a cow that had this done to it?
Right.
Right. So that becomes an interesting shaila. So Rebelsky's approach to answer this was that, no, if that's how it's being done to heal it, it's not going to be making into a treifa. So you don't have to worry about that as far. Okay. That was his approach. Okay. And then you go into the shilas of milk from the whole thing, and is it rove and miyat, and is it bittul, and what percentages is it less like come on. I mean, there's all sorts of other angles on the whole shilah.
Yeah.
But that was his starting point, right? Was that he said it's not a treifa, right? And that was considered a very, very bold stance.
I mean,
And
was that accepted
so
by the OU or
I think it was
you know,
accepted by the OU, but not by anybody else. So, so as
okay,
far as
well,
I'm aware,
they have a lot of achros. I'm just wondering,
you know.
I could imagine a lot of cases where a Rav will analyze the sugya, they'll come to a certain conclusion, the cooler the chumrah, and then it
Mhm.
will occur to them that nobody's going to accept this psak. And to what extent, if somebody asks a shaila, do you reply with, you know, your honest, interpretation of what the sugya comes out and how it comes out, and to what extent, should you or are you allowed to, or I don't know, take into consideration, whether this is going to be something that is ultimately accepted by the person or the kihila, the chumrah or the kula. Because I could imagine, say if somebody asks you a shaila, exactly this shaila about Rafelsky, and you say, well,
Mhm.
look, I think it's this, the kula, but the fact is everybody's going to think that nobody's going to accept that anyway. So the question is in terms of, giving guidance, um, and I'm just wondering, is that,
I'll give you three. I'll give you three Dugma examples, answers to it. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. So the first one is Rav Moshe and his approach, and to him, it didn't make any difference what anybody else had to say.
uh-huh,
If he worked through the sugya and this is the halacha, he told you this is what it comes out. And
uh-huh,
you go through my tshuva and you don't agree with me, that's your problem. Or that's how you know it's not your problem. You didn't say that. You just said, I'm just presenting you how the sugya comes out. You don't agree with
okay,
me, you don't agree with me. But I'm showing you how the sugya comes out. And I'm gonna go point by point by point by point. This is how the sugya comes out. And that's it.
mhm,
I'm showing you how to analyze the whole sugya, right? That's how we start looking at it. Okay,
mhm,
now I can tell you that I get shyless. Usually, it's the most common situation is where sometimes where a woman might ask me a question about kashrus,
okay,
which is mutter, and but I know that they're going to have difficulty accepting the fact that there's nothing that they have to do to rectify the situation.
okay,
So I might tell them to do a minor kosher procedure, which isn't necessarily required. Al pi halacha, or I think isn't, in my opinion, is not required.
mhm,
But I will suggest it to them anyway, because otherwise I think that it's just going to be what we would call tamul rabin. Okay. And there is a concept not to paskin something that's tamul rabin. And examples
well,
of that I'll give you where, let's say,
yeah,
Rav studied with a cowherd, right? For, I forgot now how long it says in the Gemara there in Sanhedrin, until he became an incredible expert in what's called a mum kavua and what isn't a mum kavua. Right? But then they wouldn't give him smicha on paskening on it because they said since he was such an expert, he would know what's a mutter in cases that nobody else would understand. Why? How can you go so far and say that that's mutter? Right?
oh, interesting,
So
right,
they gave the smicha of yatir b'choros, which we don't have anymore. Smicha called yatir b'choros, but it was a yara yodin yatir b'choros, right? It was. Can you paskin in Yeridea? Yes. Can you paskin in Choshen Mishpat? Yes. Can you paskin in Heter b'choros? So Rav's cousin was paskin he could, and Rav, who was a much bigger expert, was not paskin he could because Rebbe said he'll paskin things lakula that people are going to be shocked at, right?
right,
So like I know, like, so what's the problem? If he knows the subject, right? The
right,
Gemara said that right that we don't want him to paskin because it'll become too tamul rabin. That's
right.
strange, isn't it?
Well, I mean,
It
I
is.
just wonder if it sort of, in a way redefines what it means to, to paskin and what it means to have smicha.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that clearly it's not just about having an individual level of expertise. It's also,
Mm-hmm.
involves, having some sort of function in the kihila. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that function is whether the kihila is actually going to follow it and understand it. And
Yeah, that's what it seems to be.
yeah,
That's what it seems to be, which is, but where does that go now? It's the question's a good question, and we find by Bechoros certain special halachos, which probably have to do with the fact that people really didn't understand the rules of why Bechoros are sometimes mutter and sometimes usher. So there's like halachas there of, there's some very interesting halachas there. So for example, a Talmud Chacham can paskin on his own animal,
Hmm.
right, as a rule of thumb on trephis. Or he can paskin on his own shaila. Nothing wrong with his paskin on shaila, according to most poskim. He can't paskin on a bechor himself, on his own, his own bechor.
Huh.
Because
Why?
people, the answer usually assumed is that people will be cheshed him, right? That he's being matter something that's really not mutter, and we don't want, that's a marasayan type of a din. People will
Uh-huh.
be cheshed. Now, maybe that's what Rob Rebbe was concerned about here, that Rob will be matter things. And
Hmm.
people will say, oh, no, 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 this can't be mutter. Rob must be doing this because he wants everybody to bring him the business of paskening on Bechor, and they'll pay him, they'll tip him nicely to pasken on their Bechor,
Huh.
right? And that's why he's doing it. That's why he's so I mean, like maybe that's what it is. I'm just throwing out a possibility, right, of Marasayan, which we find such a score specifically by Bechor. And maybe this is a Marasayan type of an idea. Could be. Could be. I don't know. I'm just throwing out. It makes sense to me that that could be so.
Right.
And I'm going to share with you one other situation. Um,
Uh-huh.
the Shabbos afternoon shir that I give.
Uh-huh.
So one member of the shir has been lobbying me that he'd like me to give shir on some of the very contemporary, interesting shilas that are coming up.
Okay.
Okay. And there's a lot of very, very. Some of them are real heart wrenching ones. I'll just mention the shilah. There's a whole shiloh of Ismail. If someone was killed, let's say, had no children, but you can be motzi the zera from him after he's dead and use it to impregnate his wife, which has all sorts of interesting ramifications for Ilchus Yibam and Chalitza, for example,
Uh-huh.
right? Which I'm not going to go down that route. And it may be a shiloh nivel ames. I mean, I like all sorts of interesting shilohs that you can conjecture about this. And he's asked me, could I give shiurim on that? And I told him no. And
Oh.
he said, well, why not? I said, there's two reasons why not. Number one is I'm really not interested in these topics,
Uh-huh.
right? Because as a rule of thumb, nobody's going to, this child is going to have to be dealt with if it ever comes to a major issue. No pun intended in that case, but it's going to have to be dealt with on a very large scale and fine with by someone that's highly recognized in Klal Yisrael as one of its major poskim.
Right.
And I don't see myself ever being in that role. Certainly, I'm not today in that role, and I don't expect in the future to ever be in that
And
role.
and I imagine part of that is because whatever the policy becomes, we want it to be something that's accepted by everybody. So we don't have, some people saying, "Oh, this guy is, I don't know, I don't know what the, this
Whatever
guy
they're going to
isn't kosher and this guy is right?"
be, whatever it's going to be, they're going to be different poskim who are recognized by different kehillos as their main posek.
Hmm.
In other words, let's say Rav Moshe Sternbuch is certainly at some point going to be involved in some of these shilas,
Hmm.
okay? Because he's well accepted by a large group, okay? Um, who else do we have? Let's say some of Rav Avadia's sons will at some point probably be involved, right? His two sons, that were Rav Yitzchak David, they'll probably be involved at some level on, dealing with these Piskei Halacha. I can think of other Rabbanim that are going to be involved at some point in making these decisions. Okay.
Hmm.
And, each kafi Eidaso, I do so, or Eidaso, I should say, Eidaso, will be someone that they're going to using to follow that, right? I, at this point, do not have such a following. I don't anticipate ever having such a following. I have a very small following, right? And the small following we have are not going to be involved in making these decisions for themselves for the most part. Maybe they are, but it'll be very, very small scale. But
Hmm.
And I, by nature, I'm a reserved person. In other words, I
Uh,
don't like to get involved in my focus. I don't like to get involved. The only way I like to go to a din Torah is as a dayan.
uh,
You know, I don't like to be the Tobeya and I don't like to be the Nitfa. I've been unfortunately in the situation of both. And and most of the time when I've had a position where I should have been Tobeya somebody to a din Torah, I just let it fall by the wayside because it just creates too much stresses on me.
mhm.
And, but whereas, I'm just not by nature the some type of guy. There's some people who love survive on controversy. That's their you know, Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu survive on controversy. That's their whole nature is to do so, right? So they don't have any problem with that, right?
Right,
I am not that person. I'm not the thing. So I thought I don't want to get involved
right.
in it. I said,
So,
I see no gain by it, and I have no interest in becoming the big expert on it. So, as an example, I have, as I refer to these shilas as shilas my Zeta was never asked. Okay, you knew of my Zeta. You know, obviously never met him, but he was a big posek, big choshev posek, Talmud Chacham, right? He knew, Yeridea with Pri Megadim, probably all Daled Chelke Shulchan Aruch with all the Nosei Kalim, including Pri Megadim, without having to refer to any of them, right? Because he expected just Talmidim before he gives them smicha to know the Yeridea that well. So, and you've just done the Yeridea, that's a pretty impressive feat, right?
yeah.
Um, but there's shilas that he never dealt with. So, like when somebody asked me the shilah the first time of, which today is unfortunately now a common shilah, two lesbians decide that they're going to have a child and they're going to raise the child as a two-parent household. One of them is donating her egg, and the other one is going to carry the baby.
Oh, so the question is, who's the
Okay,
mother?
and one is Jewish and one isn't Jewish.
Okay.
Is the kid Jewish?
I don't know. I thought it just went after the birth mother.
Well, who's the birth mother here? The biological supplier of the DNA, or the one who
No,
carried it for 9 months?
the one carrying.
I don't know why you're assuming so, because then what about host motherhood then? But they don't call it host motherhood. They now call it, they have a different term for it. 1 second. I'm just drawing a blank. They
Well,
used to,
because if you have a woman who's
this is
converting,
this is already Ma'asim B'chol Yom. You
I don't
have
know.
a
I just
you have a
because if a
you have a
woman
couple
converts
you have a
halfway through the
couple in which
pregnancy, the kid is a Jew. So
you have a couple in which the a married couple, both
yeah,
Jewish,
right,
the woman cannot hold a pregnancy to fruition,
right,
right? So they take the couple they take a conceived fetus, not a fetus,
yeah,
usually a zygote, right? They implant it into a woman who is going to be the whose womb is going to be used to carry this child to fruition.
yeah,
Okay, surrogate motherhood is what it's called now,
right.
right? So now the surrogate mother is often not Jewish. Usually, is not Jewish,
I mean, how is it
right?
fundamentally different from a
You,
woman
you
who become yeah.
well, you were asking a question. We'll go through it.
I mean,
I'm just pointing out.
just because with woman who becomes a ger,
you've just poskined that that this child requires gerus.
well, yeah, because
Okay, let
what
me take it a step further.
I
Let's
don't know.
say
I thought
that
it was kind of
the father is a Kohen,
okay.
right? Kohen marries woman.
Yeah,
Nothing wrong with that. They're allowed to marry one another. She just can't carry a pregnancy through.
right.
They have a surrogate woman carry their child to fruition,
Yeah,
right? According to what you're telling me, this daughter can't marry a Kohen.
yeah.
Okay, I'm just telling you the
I mean,
ramifications of what you asked.
yeah.
I'm not
I
telling you
mean,
it's true
it's
one way or
super
the other.
awkward, and
Uh,
I mean, I have friends
uh,
that want to do this for one reason or another,
right? Okay.
and it can get very awkward if if the parents aren't if they're not from, then it gets more awkward. But the thing is that there's a halacha that if a woman is megayer
Yeah, I
when
know. Right.
so they're clearly, you're going after the birth mother, and the fact that the child was conceived
Okay. Um,
before isn't
I,
taken into consideration at
I
all.
have I could say a friend of mine, a Rove that I know, who
Yeah.
wrote a sefer on Kuntris on this Shaila.
Okay.
Okay. The Kuntris is a whole sefer.
Uh,
He published it as an entire sefer. Okay. And with all the discussion, the con, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he does not reach a conclusion.
okay. I
Okay.
guess I don't know. I'll have to look at the cipher, I guess.
Yeah. And the author's name is Shimon Silver. I don't remember the name of
Uh,
the sefer, but I do know that he published a sefer. And I do know it's probably not available for sale in your local Hebrew bookstore in Puerto Rico. I would suspect that it's not available for sale there because the market for people to purchase such a sefer from such a non-existent Jewish bookstore, right, isn't so big that they would bother distributing it. But
yeah.
he's a Rav in Pittsburgh, and you can contact him and ask him if he can ship you a copy, or maybe he has it being sold on Amazon for all I know. Okay,
Uh-huh.
and he does have an email address, which I believe I have. It's a very interesting email address he uses, but okay. But anyway, I'm just pointing out interesting shilas. Okay, so now you had another next question here, I think, on your list there.
Oh, well, just the well well, I do want to get to the sliding scale, but I think maybe on Thursday.
Okay.
But I was just wondering, just the
What do you
last
mean
part
by
of this.
sliding? What do you mean by sliding scale? Just so I know how to prepare myself
So
for things.
there's a general method in PSOC where the more ideal the situation, the more machmir we're going to be, the more we're going to be choshesh for the more opinions, and the more dire the situation is in terms of hesed meruba, shastacha, b'diavad,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be more lenient. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of questions in this just general approach in halacha in terms of how lenient do we get? How strict do we get? Why is this a good thing? Is it a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
so there's a lot of parameters for that. But just in terms of the svara, which I wanted to discuss first because svara definitely I think it plays a role in the
Mm-hmm.
sliding scale. It's just one part, which is that it would seem that occasionally or always or sometimes we take into consideration and understanding of how the halacha is going to affect the kehila just on a practical level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just wondering, when or if we see post game say, okay, look, if this was a regular situation, this is how we'd interpret the Gemara, and this is what we do. But because we see, with our own eyes that this is how it's going to affect the kihila, we're going to be machmir or mako,
Okay, that's
and
definitely the Gemara does that. Okay. I mean, the Gemara says that there are things that you don't paskin. Well, so there's a few different Gemaras about it. In one instance, the Gemara says, don't paskin this Shiloh because people won't understand why you were mat in this case. In a different case, it's symbol that seems to them to be similar as usher. Well, or they'll associate that this is similar to another case, and they'll say, well,
mm-hmm,
this is mutter, that's also mutter, and it's not true. This one is mutter, and that's not mutter. People don't
mm-hmm,
realize what the difference is, right?
right,
Gemara says that certain places they says lo hava b'nei Torah, and since they weren't well learned in Torah, we were machmir on cases that are otherwise mutter,
mm-hmm,
right? And then you have another rule which is somewhat dissimilar, which is halacha b'nei marin kain.
right,
The halacha is that way you don't tell anybody about it, which is probably also for the same reason. If somebody asks, if you see somebody doing it, you don't say a word because what they're doing is okay. But
mm-hmm.
if somebody asks you a shaila about it, you tell them it's usher.
Interesting.
Right. So you do have situations where we have things like halacha bein marin kain or right.
Hmm.
And the Gemara talks about a few such situations where we do that, and then you do have poskim will come up with different halacha because of that
Well,
in various shilas.
well, what about a sort of situation where I'll just bring two examples. One, I think that we go lakula and one chumra is, let's say, two heterim. There's heter iska and heter mechira,
Mm-hmm.
right? And both you could imagine say, well, look, we need heter iska because otherwise, people are going to have a lot of trouble affording a house or other sorts of loans or paying their phone bill or whatever. So we're going to need that heter, and then heter mechira is another one where the argument is, well, if we don't have this heter, then the agriculture system is going to, I don't know, collapse or whatever the claims are. So without so
Let,
the
let, let,
question is,
let me comment on those two examples.
yeah,
Okay. Okay. So heter iska, according to the Rishonim who paskin heter iska is mutter,
right,
is not the pshat that it's a problematic heter. It's not a problematic heter.
okay,
It's perfectly mutter. Okay. The Trumas edition says heter iska is perfectly mutter, even where the intention of the people involved is to make a legalized loan with ribis,
okay,
right? And they want to basically work around the halacha that says you're not allowed to lend money with ribis,
right.
right? But you can use a heteriska for that purpose because a heteriska is not a loan with ribis. It's not a loan.
Okay. So
Okay.
effectively, even if heter iska were not necessary at all, people would still hold of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's
because
right.
why not?
The Truman edition says a beferish, right? That a
Okay.
heteriska is not a ribis case. So it's because it's not a loan.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. Now, heter mechira was, for Shmiya's purposes, as I see what you're referring to,
Yeah. Yeah.
the early discussion about it, right, was not, was first of all, lots of poskim didn't like the heter at all. They
Mhm.
held it's not such a valid heter to begin with,
Right.
right? Then there were those who held, well, this is going to destroy the whole observance of Shemitah.
Right.
Okay, and we're coming back to Eretz Yisrael after hundreds of years not being able to be there. We want to observe all the mitzvahs of Leis Moritz. Okay, and the very same Rabbonim in one Shemitah paskin that you can't rely on Heter Mechira, and in the next Shemitah approved of it. And the reason was that in the first Shemitah they said, let's have everybody follow the halacha the way you're supposed to. And
Right.
then the second, 7 years later, they said people weren't doing it. Right? They saw
Uh-huh.
very few people were really keeping to it. They said, well, we have no choice. They're going to operate their fields anyway. So
Oh,
better that they
okay.
operate it with a heter mechira, right, than not operate it without ignoring any heter.
Oh, interesting. And not out of some sort of economic
And I don't know
consideration.
anybody in the poskim who felt this way at all. I've
Uh-huh.
heard the argument quoted by people, but not if you look back at the literature of the poskim that were talking about it in the 1800s for sure, in the early 1900s, all of the poskim there were talking about it in terms of, is there enough foundation to be makel for people who are not going to probably listen to a isser anyway? Okay, and there's
Right.
not a single posik there who said that I lechatchila want people to do heter mechira.
Right.
Everybody said, even the most mekilim of heter mechira, said it's only because it's a life-threatening situation here that people are going to starve if we don't do it, or because they're not going to observe it anyway, one or the other heter, and therefore we'll rely on a heter mechira. And nobody said it's because we
Interesting.
can't function without it. I've seen it today in people's names saying that reason. But
Right.
you look at the earlier Jews, nobody says that. They say either because people will starve to death or because they won't be able to observe it. So let's give them the heter, right?
Interesting.
So it's very different from heter iska, in which case the Rishonim said it's 100% mutter,
Right.
right? It is an
Well,
iska.
I guess I'm
Heter mechira, where they're saying, right, we really don't want this, right?
well, I
And then
guess I guess what
and
I'm
then you
looking
had
for is
then you had the Ostrom, like the old Yishuv and the Chazanishnik and the Rabbi Yoshev, who said that the heter doesn't work altogether. It's no good, right?
right.
Because of the way it's done. But But the earlier majority of the earlier poskim said it's good, but we don't want to rely on it, right? Because it's really not the spirit of what we want to involve.
Yeah, this isn't where we want the nation to go, which I guess is one form of smart. Is there a situation where where a rabbanim or poskenim will look at the way a certain halacha would affect things economically without getting to sakanas nefashos, and
Yes,
use that intuition to, let's say, resolve a machlokas,
yes.
something like that.
It might be used that way. In other words, I would word it a little differently.
Okay.
I would word it that we have a machlokus, and we can rely on the mekilim, right? And we will do so because of the ramifications. How difficult it will be for people if we don't do that.
Right.
But
Right. And
it's closer to a yesh lismo al shita zu b'shas adchak, which is what you
right.
asked to talk about for Thursday. So it's
Right.
closer to that.
Well, I guess I don't know. I guess I'm searching for some. I'm having trouble finding the words, but not only as a situation of necessity, but I'm just wondering when we if we have like the idea, an ideal in the Torah that the mitzvot are supposed to be something that
Noam.
derachei darchei noam v'chai
Oh,
bahem leman yirgu yimehem. There's a
Yeah,
lot of psukim talking about psukim. That the Torah is
there's a
going
lot.
to.
There's a lot of times that poskim will say that we will allow an eruv based on a certain heter, right? Even
Right.
though I can not 100%. It may be arguable whether the heter is good,
Mhm.
but the alternative of saying that they can't put an eruv altogether is worse.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And the implication would be that that's an ideal in the Torah that we want to balance into the consideration. Not
Yes.
that,
Mhm.
so it's,
That's right. Mhm. Okay,
uh
we'll continue
yeah.
Thursday.
All right. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
great.
Okay.
How should we,
Yeah.
think about how to title this one? Shmuel likes short titles, or he says the system likes short titles. Okay.
Okay. Well,
Uh,
I was thinking something about Svar and Halacha. That's what I was trying to ask.
to me, it's too broad, you know.
Okay.
But poskening based on Svara, you can say that poskening based purely on
Okay.
Svara.
Okay.
Poskening, deciding a halachic decision based purely on analysis.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Sounds
now
good.
take care.
Okay. Okay. Bye.